Alice in Wonderland as a poem. Chapter 2. The Pool of Tears. Curiouser and curiouser. She's so much surprised that, for the moment, she's forgotten how to speak good English. Now I'm opening out, like the largest telescope that ever was. Goodbye, feet. For when she looks down at her feet, they seem to be almost out of sight. They were getting so far off. Oh, my poor little feet. I wonder who will put your shoes and stockings on for you now, dears. I'm sure I shan't be able. I shall be a great deal too far off to trouble myself about you. You must manage the best way you can, but I must be kind to them, or perhaps they won't walk the way I want to go. Let me see, every Christmas I'll give them a new pair of boots. And she goes on planning how she would manage it. They must go by the carrier, and how funny it'll seem, sending presents to one's own feet, and how odd the directions will look. Alice's right foot, Esquire, hearthrug near the fender, with Alice's love. Oh dear, what nonsense I'm talking. Just then her head strikes against the roof of the hall. In fact, she's now more than 9 feet high. She at once takes the golden key and goes hurrying off to the garden door. Poor Alice, it's as much as she can do, lying down on one side, to look into the garden with one eye. But to get through is more hopeless than ever. She sits down and begins to cry again. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, a great girl like you. She might well say this, to go on crying in this way. Stop this moment, I tell you. But she goes on, all the same, shedding gallons of tears until there's a large pool all round her, about 4 inches deep and reaching halfway down the hall. After a time she hears a little distant pattering of feet, and she hastily dries her eyes to see what's coming. It's the White Rabbit returning, splendidly dressed, with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. He's trotting along hurriedly, muttering to himself meanwhile, "Oh, the Duchess, the Duchess! Oh, won't she be savage if I've kept her waiting?" Alice feels so desperate that she's ready to ask help of anyone. So when the rabbit comes near her, she begins in a low, timid voice, "If you please, sir." The rabbit starts violently, drops the kid gloves and the fan, and scurries away into the darkness as hard as he can go. Alice takes up the fan and gloves, and as the hall is very hot, she keeps fanning herself all the time she goes on talking. Dear, dear, how queer everything is today, and yesterday things went on just as usual. I wonder if I've been changed in the night. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. But if I'm not the same, the next question is, who in the world am I? Ah, that's the great puzzle. And she begins thinking over all the children she knows who are the same age as herself, to see if she can have been changed for any of them. I'm sure I'm not Ada, for her hair goes in such long ringlets, and mine doesn't go in ringlets at all. And I'm sure I can't be Mabel, for I know all sorts of things, and oh, she knows so very little. Besides, she's she, and I'm I, and oh dear, how puzzling it all is. I'll try if I know all the things I used to know. Let me see. 4 times 5 is 12, and 4 times 6 is 13, and 4 times 7 is, oh dear, I shall never get to 20 at that rate. However, the multiplication table doesn't signify. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome, and Rome, no, that's all wrong, I'm certain. I must have been changed for Mabel. I'll try and recite "How doth the little," and she crosses her hands on her lap as if she were saying lessons, and begins to repeat it. but her voice sounds hoarse and strange, and the words don't come the same as they used to. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly spread his claws, and welcome little fishes in with gently smiling jaws. I'm sure those aren't the right words. Her eyes fill with tears. I must be Mabel after all, and I'll have to go and live in that poky little house and have next to no toys to play with and, oh, ever so many lessons to learn. No, I've made up my mind about it. If I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here. It'll be no use their putting their heads down and saying, "Come up again, dear." I shall only look up and say, "Who am I then? Tell me that first, and then, if I like being that person, I'll come up. If not, I'll stay down here till I'm somebody else. But oh dear," a sudden burst of tears, "I do wish they would put their heads down. I'm so very tired of being all alone here." As she says this, she looks down at her hands and is surprised to see that she's put on one of the rabbit's little white kid gloves while she's been talking. How can I have done that? I must be growing small again. She ups and goes to the table to measure herself by it, and finds that, as nearly as she can guess, she is now about 2 feet tall, but is still shrinking rapidly. The reason for which, she finds out, is the fan she's holding, so she drops it hastily, just in time to avoid shrinking away altogether. That was a narrow escape. She's a good deal frightened at the sudden change, but very glad to find herself still in existence. And now for the garden, and she runs quickly back to the little door. But alas, the little door is shut again, and the key is still lying on the glass table. And things are worse than ever, for I never was so small as this before, never, and I declare it's too bad, that it is. As she says these words, her foot slips, and splash, she's up to her chin in salt water. Her first idea is that she's somehow fallen into the sea, and in that case I can go back by railway. Alice has been to the seaside only once in her life, and has come to the conclusion that wherever you go to on the English coast, you find a number of bathing machines in the sea, some children digging in the sand with wooden spades, then a row of lodging houses in front of a railway station. However, she soon makes out that she's in the pool of tears she wept when she was 9 feet high. I wish I hadn't cried so much. She's swimming about, trying to find her way out. I'll be punished for it now, I suppose, by being drowned in my own tears. That'll be a queer thing, for sure. However, everything is queer today. Just then she hears something splashing about in the pool nearby, and she swims nearer to make out what it is. At first she thinks it must be a walrus or hippopotamus, but then she remembers how small she is now, and soon makes out that it's only a mouse that slipped in like herself. Would it be of any use now if I speak to this mouse? Everything's so out of the way down here that I should think very likely it can talk. At any rate, there's no harm in trying, so she begins. "Oh, mouse, do you know the way out of this pool? I am very tired of swimming about here, oh mouse." Alice thinks this must be the right way to speak to a mouse. She has never done such a thing before, but remembers seeing, in her brother's Latin grammar, "A mouse, of a mouse, to a mouse, oh mouse." The mouse looks at her rather inquisitively, and seems to wink with one of its little eyes, but it says nothing. Perhaps it doesn't understand English. I dare say it's a French mouse come over with William the Conqueror. For with all her knowledge of history, Alice has no very clear notion how long ago anything has happened, so she begins again, "Où est ma chatte?" which was the first sentence in her French lesson book. The mouse suddenly leaps out of the water and seems to quiver all over with fright. "Oh, I beg your pardon. I quite forgot you don't like cats." "Not like cats?" cries the mouse. "Would you like cats if you were me?" "Well, perhaps not," says Alice soothingly. "Don't be angry about it. And yet I wish I could show you Dinah. I think you'd take a fancy to cats if you could see her. She's such a dear, quiet thing." As she talks, Alice is swimming lazily about in the pool, and she sits purring so nicely by the fire, licking her paws and washing her face, and she's such a nice soft thing to nurse, and she's such a capital one for catching mice. "Oh, I do beg your pardon." This time the mouse is bristling all over, and she feels certain it must be really offended. "We won't talk about her any more, if you'd rather not." "We, indeed." The mouse is trembling all over down to the end of his tail. "As if I would talk about cats. Our family always hated them. Nasty, low, vulgar things. Don't let me hear the name again." "I won't indeed," says Alice, in a great hurry to change the subject. Are you fond of dogs?" The mouse doesn't answer, so Alice goes on eagerly. "There's such a nice little dog near our house I should like to show you. A little bright-eyed terrier, you know, with oh, such curly brown hair, and it'll fetch things when you throw them, and it'll sit up and beg for its dinner, and all sorts of things. I can't remember half of them, and it belongs to a farmer, you know, and he says it's so useful it's worth £100. He says it kills all the rats, and oh dear, I'm afraid I've offended it again," for the mouse is swimming away from her as hard as it can go, and making quite a commotion in the pool as it goes. So she calls after it, "Mouse dear, do come back again, and we won't talk about cats or dogs either, if you don't like them." When the mouse hears this, it turns round and swims back slowly to her. Its face is pale with passion, Alice thinks, and it says in a low, trembling voice, "Let us get to the shore, and then I'll tell you my history, and you'll understand why it is I hate cats and dogs." It's high time to go, for the pool is getting quite crowded with the birds and animals that have fallen into it. There's a duck and a dodo, a lory and an eaglet, and several other curious creatures. Alice leads the way, and the whole party swims to the shore.